Hello and welcome to another brand new episode of Dingers and Stingers, the podcast that commands you pay attention to this division preview episode because we are talking about the NFC East today. Our division previews continue, and we are going to be talking all about that good old NFC East, the home of the Super Bowl champion, Philadelphia Eagles. We're going to be talking about them. We'll talk about the Giants and all the fun that QB room is going to be. We'll talk about the Commanders and some late breaking news before we started recording. What could it have been? You'll find out a little later. And so lots of fun stuff to talk about today. I think this division is going to be, if it plays up to its potential, it could be one of the more fun divisions in football, both from a competitive standpoint and from storylines and people to watch standpoint. So generally, let's talk about the NFC East a little bit. So, what comes to your guys' mind when you think about the NFC East, both like specifically last season and just in general? What do you guys think about this division and these teams? What springs to mind for you?
I mean, when I think about the NFC East, it is like I would argue the fun side of like the old school NFL. Like when we did the AFC North, and you're thinking the Steelers and the Browns, the Ravens, and it's kind of just like we talked about, like they're not like the most fun division. This is like the opposite. This is a division made purely for it's a summer blockbuster, right? Like this is the division where like shit happens and you just kind of sit back and watch and you're like, oh, well, fun. They're fun. Um, and the past few years, I mean, they've had some good teams. The Cowboys had their stretch where they're really dominant, and recently it's been the Eagles. Even dating back to childhood, the Cowboys and Eagles had their moments. So they've always been prominent enough with at least one team being really good. So I'm excited. I think this is a fun division. Don't necessarily love all these teams, but at the same time, they're fun. So it should be fun to break down and get into.
When I think of the NFC East, I think about them being crammed down my throat growing up, and even still, like I didn't have the, Sunday ticket package or anything, so I was able to watch the games that came on TV in my area. And even in Southern California, not close to any of these teams, they were always on. If they weren't prime time, which they often were, they were the Sunday afternoon Fox game or whatever. So a division that I see, I kind of have negative feelings towards this division, and it's maybe not fair to these teams, but because it's the media's fault, because I've seen so many Cowboys games and I don't care about the Cowboys. I've seen so many Giants games and I don't care about the Giants. That being said, it is a fun division because the highs are so high and the lows are so low. They're either, like you were saying, Matt, you pick any given team in any given year from this division, and they're either one of the like laughing stocks of the league, or they're one of the very best teams that you don't want to face. We've seen a lot of mismanagement in this division, and we've seen a lot of chaos and scandal in this division. So there's no doubt it's an entertaining bunch, and we'll see how it shakes out in the 2025 NFL season.
Yes, sir.
Right, but before we get to the 2025 season, let's talk about last season and how this division finished. So this division last year had two playoff teams, the Eagles and the Commanders. The Eagles finished first and won 14 games and lost 3. They also won the Super Bowl. The Commanders finished second in the division and won 12 games and lost 5. They lost to the Eagles in the NFC Championship game. And then the other two teams in this division who did not make the playoffs are the Dallas Cowboys, who finished 7-10 in third place, and lastly, the New York Giants, who finished 3-14 in fourth place. So that was last year. Now let's talk about this offseason for these teams. And this is where we'll spend the bulk of our time. If you've been watching our division previews, you'll know that this is where we spend most of our time. And so let's talk about what's different and maybe what's unchanged about some of these teams going into the 2025 offseason. So the Eagles, let's start there. I'm going to go in finishing order. And so they're getting ready to mount their championship defense, right?
Yep.
Ironically, it's the defensive side of the ball that has changed the most since they won the Super Bowl back in February. The offense isn't without its changes, though. Former offensive coordinator Kellen Moore took the head coaching job in New Orleans. But Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Saquon Barkley are all returning. So the offense is built to withstand, that kind of turnover at the coaching level as of right now. But the defense was rightfully picked over in free agency. And so let's see how the Eagles filled those gaps that were left by some of those defenders that departed. So let's talk about their offseason recap. So hit us with who they got and maybe who they lost to.
Yeah, I'll fill you in.
Fill me in.
So they had a lot of departures, like you said. Notably, they brought in Joshua Uche from, I believe he played for a couple teams, but he's an edge rusher. Solid, nothing spectacular, but we've seen solid and not spectacular become superstars on this defense. My guy, Adoree Jackson, ex USC Trojan. Past his prime, but I still think the athleticism plays. And they had a great defensive back room last year, and he only adds to that. And then they added A.J. Dillon, who, if healthy, could be really scary behind that offensive line, even with Saquon there. So yeah, that's kind of some of the notable additions this year. Notable departures, however, they lost a lot. They lost Josh Sweat, their best pass rusher from last year. They lost Milton Williams. They lost James Bradbury, Darius Slay. They lost guys like Brandon Graham as well, I know, to retirement, and some of their older defensive linemen left. And then they lost Kenny Pickett, the heart and soul of that Philly team. So don't know how they're going to fill the void there, but we'll see.
Yeah, so when it comes to the defense, and especially the defensive line, they had like almost an overabundance of really good defensive linemen, and that contributed to everyone staying healthy. There was more of a rotation going on between those guys last year. And so, what do you think the impact of losing a lot on that defensive line, even though it was a lot of, Josh Sweat was a starter, and I think Milton Williams was even by the end of the season in there a lot. And so, losing those kind of guys and losing the opportunity to have more of a rotation, how do you think that's going to impact the defensive line for the Eagles this year as compared to last year?
It forces the hand of their two young guys. I mean, this defensive line is pretty much built around Jalen Carter and behind him, Jordan Davis, both the Georgia guys. I think it forces them to pretty much prove, like, do they have what it takes to truly be superstars? Because at the end of the day, Jalen Carter obviously flashed great numbers from the defensive tackle position, but to be a 3-down player for an entire season, like drive in, drive out, it takes a toll on a player. It's very rare that you see guys who can truly be 3-down defensive linemen for an entire season and not have much of a rotation behind them. We'll see kind of who ends up playing behind those two guys, but I will be interested to see if they can continue that production, because Jordan Davis is underrated. He's a superstar, I believe. His athleticism and that size absolutely plays. And Jalen Carter was awesome. I mean, Jalen Carter single-handedly ended that Rams drive in the playoffs, which if you look at the film back, we had two guys wide open for touchdowns that would have ended their playoff run, but Jalen Carter just absolutely destroyed a double team that we had on him, and they go on to win the Super Bowl. So he's obviously great. I'll be curious to see how it is when he has a full 17 games, playing every single down. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think the defensive line won't be as strong as last year, and that I think could be the case even if they didn't lose guys, because they were just so good last year. And it's hard to have repeat success in any professional sport to that level. And then you do lose a couple guys. So I think the efficiency won't be there quite as much, but I will say if any team was equipped to lose that kind of talent, it is the Eagles, who have just loads and loads of talented defenders on that team.
Yeah, even though the Seahawks didn't end up drafting Jalen Carter, he found a way to become a pseudo Seahawk legend for stopping that drive. Stepping up on that drive to stop the Rams. That'll count. Put his jersey in the rafters for that. Because I'll put it on wax. I think the Rams might have won the Super Bowl if they were able to
If
beat the
the
Eagles in
Rams
that
beat
game.
the Eagles, I genuinely believe the Rams win the Super Bowl. Like,
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, put Jalen Carter's jersey in the rafters in Seattle for stopping that drive. We want to move on now to X factors for this team, and so we'll talk about what you guys think the most important items of this will be. I will not forget to mention this up top before we move on to other teams too. I instituted a rule: no quarterbacks, no coaches. So that's why you won't hear those positions mentioned. At least primarily, we might talk about them eventually, but at least primarily, that's why they're not the X factors here. And so, yeah, let's start with Drew and then go to Matt for X factors.
Yeah, my X factor for the Eagles. I get a little creative sometimes with these and don't choose players, but um, I think it's just avoiding that Super Bowl hangover. It happens so often. I know the Chiefs were able to escape it for a year, and then they're kind of built different in that way, but they are always successful. But in general, we often see teams take a step back after winning a Super Bowl, and it's to be expected. I guess the question is, how big of a step back are they going to take, and can they stay healthy for one? Can they stay motivated? When you already have the Super Bowl ring, do you still have the same drive to get there again? And can you maintain the lofty expectations and still hit them? Because that's just not an easy thing to do. I do think that, especially on offense, they're just a very, very talented team, and they should be a playoff team. They did lose Kellen Moore, but at the same time, Jalen Hurts has had a million different offensive coordinators in his time in the NFL. Maybe that's not a great thing because he's only won the one Super Bowl, but um, yeah, I worry about some of the players they lost, but at the same time, I still think this is a very talented roster, and it's just a matter of can they recapture that magic and keep it going for a whole nother year? It's going to be tough to do.
Yeah,
yeah,
you
absolutely.
have you have teams who do the best with that Super Bowl hangover and avoiding it, right? It's teams like kind of like the Eagles this year who didn't suffer that full coaching staff turnover that some Super Bowl teams have to deal with. The
Yep.
Lions took that from the Eagles this year. They took that burden, and so uh, I think that yeah, when you talk about that, you have to consider that a factor. This head coach is the same. The offensive coordinator was there already in the building, and he was, I believe, the passing game coordinator or something like that for the team. And so, and then the defensive coordinator, Vic Fangio, is the same anyway as well. So I think that that's a key step to avoiding that Super Bowl hangover is avoiding having your entire coaching staff picked over and having to start anew with unknown guys. So
Yeah, and I mean, my X factor for them is pretty similar to what we've already talked about. Like, you've nailed a lot of the key points, but for me, it's just got to be the performance of this defensive line outside of Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. Brandon Graham, as old as he was like the ageless wonder. He continued to perform on the biggest stage. You lose Josh Sweat, you lose Milton Williams. Um, these are impactful players. And last year, they got an all-pro season out of Zach Bond out of nowhere. He was like a hybrid kind of tweener linebacker for a number of years, and then comes over and becomes an all pro first team, like leads the league in tackles and, has all these turnovers and things. And I just don't know how much you can rely on a repeat of performances like that. You've got two guys who were rookie DBs last year who kind of got thrown into the fire. How are they going to come out in their sophomore seasons? Um, so there's a lot. There's a lot, but I think the X factor really just has to be the defense because there wasn't a lot of notable change on offense. Um, that offensive line will probably be the best offensive line in football again. They did not ban the tush push, so their red zone offense will be elite once again. And AJ Brown, and they still have this good pass game. They didn't trade Dallas Goedert, which was kind of a rumor of the offseason. Um, Saquon Barkley, AJ Dillon, like that offense is loaded. Like at the end of the day, that offense is still loaded. That's not going to be the issue. But I think what really won them that Super Bowl last year was that defensive like play and specifically that D line. So um, yeah, I think if they're going to repeat and have success this year, they're going to need new guys to kind of step up on that defensive line.
Yeah, 100%. So I want to, before we move on from the Eagles, I want to talk about the offense a little bit, since we haven't really touched on them too much already. You know, Saquon Barkley, potential fantasy owners beware. The tush push is with us. It remains in effect. So, just count on those yards to get you those points. Yeah, so let's talk about the offense a little bit. If you were, the offensive coordinator for, the Eagles, is there anything that you might want to change philosophically about this offense, or would you just kind of run the same stuff back and just try to improve where you can, like in smaller areas, or would you expect maybe for them to try to surprise the league with some changes to how they run things?
My instinct is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You have, like Matt said, maybe the best offensive line in football. You have, by many evaluators' opinion, the best running back in football, and you have two wide receivers who can go get it and are super talented there. Jalen Hurts, I know we've kind of been up and down on our opinion of him as an NFL quarterback. Clearly, he can do the job. So I think, yeah, just kind of run it back. I mean, you can always add in new plays here and there to the playbook, but at the same time, it's like you have these guys, you have this talent. Trust it and don't try to get too cute with it and mess with a good thing.
Yeah, and I think kind of bouncing off that, it's like you can have new plays and new looks, but keep the same kind of philosophy as a team. And they clearly have built their roster to be one thing, right? Like they want to pound the ball, they want to run the ball, they want to just out physical you as a team. They shouldn't get away from that. I don't think they need to get fancy and start going with the wide receiver screens and doing all this stuff. Like do what you do best and find new ways and new looks to do that out of. I think that's what the best coaches do is they know what they're good at and they find new looks to do that from. It's more about how you position yourself on the field rather than changing the actual philosophy and scheme of your team. So
Yeah, and that's what I was hoping to get to is, another key of avoiding a Super Bowl hangover is to put some different stuff than what's already on tape out there. You got to have something in your back pocket, whether it's running out of different formations or disguising different looks for defenses so that they can't just look at your Super Bowl winning season tape and figure you out. And so yeah, hopefully the Eagles can manage some of that as well. But look, they did manage to avoid, a lot of the pitfalls of Super Bowl champions. Their coaching staff remains mostly intact. Like I mentioned, the Lions took the hit on that. The only minor area of concern might be the defense not being as stout due to the loss of players. But I think the offense should more than make up for any potential defensive regression. I mean, by the middle of the season, they were winning games by a lot of points. And so even if the defense's margins, increase for points allowed, things like that, I think the offense, as long as they play as good as they can, I think they'll more than make up for any, potential regression from the defense as far as points allowed a game, things like that. So that's the Eagles. Let's move on to the Washington Commanders. Last season's biggest surprise, thanks in no small part to the emergence of Jayden Daniels as the best rookie quarterback of the year. One of those things that just feels like the sun has shone on just you when it hits. When a rookie quarterback hits the way Jayden Daniels did, you feel like you as a franchise have done something correct, and the football gods are rewarding you for something. So they made it all the way to the NFC Championship game, as I mentioned, and that's no small feat, and just a lot of credit should be given to Dan Quinn, head coach, first year last year. He rallied a team mixed of young talent and veterans to be one of the most formidable teams in the league by the end of the year. And so the question is, where do the Commanders go, and where do they think they are internally? Do they think that last year was just kind of good luck? Do they think that there's something here? And so that answer would be given to us by what they did in the offseason. So let's see what they did and how they answered that question, and go to their offseason recap.
Yeah. As far as like their additions go, obviously they made some pretty notable trades this offseason. They brought in the likes of Deebo Samuel, Laramie Tunsil. They're able to sign Javon Kinlaw, and apparently they got Von Miller, which is hilarious. I mean, they are an ancient team at this point. I have to imagine they're amongst the eldest of the teams. They brought in a few DBs, Jonathan Jones, Will Harris. So they definitely went out and they saw their success and they said, let's add to that. And as far as their departures at this point, not a ton of notable departures have happened, to be honest. They retained a lot of their impending free agents. They kept Zach Ertz, they kept Bobby Wagner. They're able to keep their starting center, Michael Dieter. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting it's kind of been an interesting offseason, but they've been able to mostly add to a team that obviously made a deep playoff push last year. So, as long as we don't see a sophomore slump from Jayden Daniels, this could be a really exciting team. Obviously, there was a little bit of news that broke just a couple minutes ago, which I'll let Drew kind of get into because it ties in with some of what he has to say. But yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, before we get to that, look, I know Bobby Wagner can't cover anybody anymore. I know his knees are just bones and lime green jello. But look, I make the rules on this show, and as long as he plays, he will be a notable player that they retained. It is notable that they retained him, okay? I get it. I know he's not that good anymore, but, that's why we
I was
included
gonna
him in the
say,
notable here.
man, Von Miller and Bobby Wagner in the same defense. Like 2015 teams are quaking right now.
What year is it? I
Uh,
wish it was 10 years ago.
yeah,
We would have fun with that. Maybe they can share ligaments, maybe they can, put them together. You can make one
Combine them into
linebacker.
one man.
Yeah, one
no.
linebacker. So yeah, that's all told there. That's a very busy offseason. So let's go straight to X Factors though, so we can talk about some really interesting stuff that might be going down. So let's start with Drew on X Factors, and then we'll go to Matt after we're done with those.
Yeah, so as Matt alluded to, the big news that just broke a few minutes before we started recording is that Terry McLaurin, the number one receiver for the Commanders for the last several years, has requested a trade. And usually that means he will be traded. So likely not on the team for this year, which plays into my X factor, which I had chosen before. And the reason was because Terry McLaurin had been holding out. I know he came back to practice this week, but he still didn't have that contract. So I kind of just figured there was some kind of funny business going on. I didn't necessarily anticipate this quick of a trade request, but it's happened. So my X factor is their big addition from the offseason, Deebo Samuel, because he got paid just a few years ago from the 49ers, had some big years with them, has coming over to the Commanders. I think it really would have been a great fit as the second option behind Terry McLaurin. But now he's got to step up into that number one role, provided no one else has a breakout year. And I just don't know if he's up to the task. I think he's a perfectly solid player, but he's not, he's not the deep threat. He's the yard after the catch kind of god. But he's also spent a lot of time injured in recent years. He is just, every year older is another year riskier for NFL players specifically. So if Deebo Samuel is now the number one option in this offense, which I really liked a lot of the pieces of this offense, particularly quarterback Jayden Daniels. I really like the addition of Laramie Tunsil at left tackle. I think that's going to be a great thing for Jayden Daniels' career. But we've seen it before. If you don't have reliable receivers, you can't go as far as you want to. And so If Deebo Samuel can step up and return to those, maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago numbers he had with the 49ers, then I think this team will be A-OK, no problem. But if Terry McLaurin gets traded, Deebo Samuel is just unproductive or injured, I think they're in for some real trouble here.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
I
I want to stay on this wide receiver group for a little bit, because I want to ask like Matt too, like it obviously would change how you view this offense and what their ceiling might be if Terry leaves, but like how much does it change like the ceiling of this group if it's not Terry being the number one option?
I think if you ask this about most teams, you could argue not a ton, but Debo's pretty much proven he can't sustain himself as a wide receiver one, which is why the 49ers wanted to get rid of the contract and kind of, move on from that, is because they've had issues with their health at wide receiver, so they needed Debo to step up, and he couldn't. This seemed like a perfect opportunity for Debo. Terry McLaurin has been a like a picture perfect example of consistency. He's Mike Evans without the notoriety. And for, the team looking at this, it's like, Drew nailed it. Debo would have been the perfect number two. Without Terry McLaurin, I have a lot of concern, like deep, deep concern with what this wide receiver group can bring to the table. I hope for their sake, this is one of those request a trade to get leverage in contract negotiations. Because yeah, I love Jayden Daniels as a player. I would hate to see his development get stunted and have him have this, big sophomore slump just because of contract stuff with a receiver. I'm worried, to be honest. I'm pretty worried.
Yeah, that's absolutely a risk. Is not only do you risk, your offense not performing as well as a whole, but you risk, and potentially impacting the development of Jayden Daniels with a shift like this. That's sort of like very last minute and out of nowhere. It would be if it goes through. If a trade actually happens, it would be a very last minute before the season. Right now they're putting the playbook together. They're getting used to what kind of system they're going to be running and how they're going to use everybody. And so if suddenly the number one option in that system disappears, you've been practicing it all offseason, disappears, midway through the preseason, at some point, that's, for a second year quarterback, that can be really, really hard to have to deal with. But let's continue to talk about the offense a little bit with Matt's X factor.
Yeah, so my X factor is Laramie Tunsil. I genuinely believe, like, I'm very worried about that wide receiver group. I easily could say, like, I think Terry McLaurin and that contract are the X factor, and I think it is. Like, it very much so is. But at the same time, you got to play with what you have, right? No matter what, they're going into the season and they're going to have to play football games. They invested in their offensive line. And I think what a lot of people don't realize, Jayden Daniels was one of the most pressured and one of the most sacked quarterbacks. People just didn't realize it because of how successful he was under pressure last year. He was one of the best scrambling quarterbacks, and that goes a long way. And that can lead to being sacked a few more times than average. But he was pressured 34% of his passes, a little over 34%. His average time in the pocket was only 2.4 seconds, which ranked in the bottom 5. He was sacked 47 times, which is the 5th most. And so he led the league in scrambles when he had less than 2.5 seconds. The dude was running around, making plays, being magic. And I think that is kind of what you get with a quarterback like him who has that athletic profile. But what people don't realize is he was also the 5th best quarterback when facing no pressure in the entire league. That stands among the best quarterbacks in the league. First among rookies, obviously. And so it's one of those things, he can be great under pressure, and he's even better when he's not. And I think that could prove wonders. And Laramie Tunsil is an elite pass protector. He has a little bit to be desired in the run game, but he could be an elite pass protector. Last year with Houston, he just really struggled one with penalties. He had a lot of penalties and just kind of some mental mistakes. But at the end of the day, his pass protection was still top rated. He is still an elite pass protecting, bookend left tackle. And I think that for Jayden Daniels can do a lot. And if any of his receivers are going to step up and have a breakout season with Terry leaves, I think a lot of it will be because of the protection that he gets and how accurate he is when he has protection.
Yeah. Well, that's a good amount of talk about the offense and the potential for the big swings of how it could go. I think, yeah, you guys nailed it. I think those two units on the offense are really going to determine, how this thing goes for them. I want to spend just a little bit of time on the defense before we head off to the next team. This defense, they are obviously older. They are obviously they struggled last year, in things like run defense, and their linebackers really couldn't cover that well, and get better as far as that weakness is concerned. But I am not super familiar, but they might have addressed some of that through the draft, but I don't remember. But talk about the defense for a second. Like, do you see them improving at all over last year? Like, because that could help, if the offense struggles, especially if they lose pieces late. If the offense struggles, an improvement from the defense might be able to throw a little assist their way while they figure it out.
Yeah, I think they definitely brought in some talent. They also got rid of some guys who were struggling in that defensive backfield. That's been a huge part of their defense the past few years is they actually had a pretty solid front seven, and their DBs just couldn't really get much done. But last year they addressed that a little bit. They went out and traded for Marshawn Lattimore. People kind of forget Marshawn Lattimore is a star corner. Like he is a great corner. And they have him locking down, top receivers now. And he'll have a full offseason under his belt in this defense as well. And then they also got, I'm not even going to pretend to pronounce that name, but his name's Noah Iganobujijin. And he was a first round pick of the Dolphins a few years back. And he had moments there as well in that Miami defense. So they bring in some guys like that. They have a really athletic linebacking group, to be honest. They've drafted pretty well there. And then they also brought in Frankie Louvu from the Panthers, who's an underrated guy. All of it obviously being led by Bobby Wagner. You bring in Javon Kinlaw, you got Daron Payne. Like they drafted Jerzon Newton. It has potential. I don't know if I see this being an elite group. It would probably take resurgent years from Von Miller and Bobby Wagner for this to be a great defense. But I don't think this is going to be a bad defense. Like I do not think that they're going to be a liability by any means. So yeah, I mean, if they could get some production out of their old guys, like that would go a long way in helping out a struggling offense or a potentially struggling offense.
Yeah, I think I agree. I mean, if everyone stays healthy and plays to their best potential, this could be a really good defense. I just think it's a lot of a much riskier group than some other teams we'll talk about. Not even just this division, just like in football in general. Like, it's just not a firm foundation. And when you're relying on some older players, there's an inherent injury risk that's even greater than those, that's already there for football in general. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Like I don't. I think their defense was kind of like their Achilles heel last year, even in the playoffs. Like, I mean, we saw the game they lost to the Eagles in the playoffs. It was, the offense was rolling for them. It was the defense that really kind of let them down. So I don't know. I don't have like super high expectations for this group. It's a lot of fun names. So, there could be some highlight reel type days for them, but I don't know as a whole if they're going to be one of the tougher defenses in the league.
Yeah. So, when you think about the Commanders as we wrap them up, they had a pretty ideal offseason so far. Any sort of Terry McLaurin trade could obviously switch that up. But they retained most of their key free agents. They signed players who could help improve their areas of need. The hope is that the offense can reach its final form with Deebo Samuel and Laramie Tunsil on board. Again, what we just got might change that. But the addition of the defensive line and other places will surely help the defense improve in the run game, at least, I think. And so if those things are both solved, if the offense can take another step forward and the defense can improve, especially in the run game, I think the Commanders could, be a force in the division and, in the NFC once again. I do have some faith in Dan Quinn. I think, the Dan Quinn experience, I think we know what that kind of looks like right now. He was the head coach of the Falcons for a little while. Like, was it the second year of that he was the head coach that they made the Super Bowl, or the third year? I can't remember if it was the second or third. Maybe it was his first. I don't know. But there, and then the Cowboys, defense had that great year when he was the first year the defensive coordinator over there, and then kind of struggled to match that. So the Dan Quinn experience would suggest that perhaps they will regress a little bit, or peak now and then regress later. But, who's to say you can't change the narrative on yourself? And so hopefully he does that. Keep the Pete Carroll tree alive. A couple leaves left from that.
Pete Carroll, the base of the tree hasn't died yet. So.
True. Yeah. The all the branches might fall
he got
off
propagated.
before the trunk gets uprooted, the branches might all die out, I guess. But
it's got one withering black and silver branch.
Yeah. I'm like vibrating at the for our AFC NFC West episodes. Like, so many of my friends live over there. And so, but let's stick here. Let's keep our focus here. That's mostly just for me. But let's talk about the Cowboys next. So the Cowboys of Dallas, my namesake, they were feeling good at the start of the 24-25 season. Despite losing Dan Quinn to their rival Commanders, they also lost, franchise offensive lineman Tyron Smith to free agency that year, the year before last year. And so, they were feeling good, though. Those good feelings quickly did begin to dissipate as the season went on, and the run game proved to be non-existent. Their defense regressed massively, and finally, when Dak Prescott, their quarterback, was injured midway through the year. Mike McCarthy, as a result of the disappointing season, was fired as head coach, and now Brian Schottenheimer has been hired to replace him. Brian Schottenheimer, the non-play calling offensive coordinator for the Cowboys last year. And so what will this offense look like under Schottenheimer? Maybe their offseason will tell us. So let's talk about what they did this offseason and go to their offseason recap.
Yeah, so they've had a whirlwind of an offseason, to put it lightly. As far as guys they brought in, obviously they made the trade for George Pickens, which is a whole story and headache of its own. They brought in Javonte Williams, running back from Denver, Robert Jones, the offensive lineman, Solomon Thomas to fill in on that D-line. But they've lost some guys who've been pretty prominent for them. They lose kind of defensive franchise player DeMarcus Lawrence. That's a huge blow. Even if his production is lessened, he was kind of the heart and soul of that defense. They lose Rico Dowdle, who was their leading rusher last year. They lost Brandon Cooks, who is like the world's best number 2 receiver. They lost Jordan Lewis, who is one of their starting corners, and Zach Martin. Maybe you could argue is the best guard of all time, at least top 3, top 4. He retired. So I would argue they've definitely lost more than they've gained this offseason. And there's just been a lot of drama there. It's an interesting team. It is an interesting team, to say the least. But yeah, I mean, what else to say? Like, it is just a wild place.
Yeah, I don't know if this offseason, these losses and additions, I don't know if it tells us much about, what the vision for this offense is. I think it's mostly they're going to try to do some of the same stuff, right? Like, but with just hopefully, the idea is that they upgraded massively at wide receiver too, and they can use George Pickens to get CeeDee Lamb open, or vice versa, right? It's they viewed it as better to have CeeDee Lamb doubled and George Pickens singled than to have CeeDee Lamb doubled and Brandon Cooks singled. That was how they viewed it, and so I think it'll be a lot of the same. Rico Dowdle, he was their leading rusher last year for sure. I think that Javonte Williams is a little bit of an upgrade at running back. I'd be willing to hear arguments on that if you have them, but as a Javonte Williams fantasy manager, a couple years in a row, at least at different times, I think he has more to give than Rico Dowdle might have a second year of that. But maybe Drew, you could offer some perspective on that, the running back situation here. What do you think about Javonte in Dallas?
Well, I think we've seen a history of strong running back seasons from Dallas Cowboys running backs. And a lot of that has to do with they had a legendary offensive line for a number of years. And with the retirement of Zach Martin, that's kind of the last guy who was still there from the, through the 2010s. They were very strong in that department. So that being said, I think any running back, could have flourished in that environment. And this new offensive line, their first round pick was Tyler Booker, a guard from Alabama, and as Matt pointed out, Robert Jones joins the offensive line. Like, we'll see kind of what the new iteration looks like, and I think that plays a big part into how successful Javonte Williams will be. But as a Broncos fan who was very excited when we picked him in the draft a few years back, it just never came to fruition, the expectations we had for him. He would show flashes of this, tackle breaking skill he had. He would have a good game here and there, but a lot of it is due to an ACL injury he had in, I believe it was his second season, but we just never saw him get fully back to being like a starting, no doubt starting running back in the NFL, and he got passed up on the depth chart a couple times. And so I like him as a change of scenery candidate, but I also don't have the highest expectations because I've just been fooled too many times by him, where this might just be who he is, like a perfectly decent running back who's never going to reach his potential as a star in this league.
And let me point out, you mentioned Zach Martin retired. That obviously is a huge part of that offensive line. A couple years back, what's his name? Tyron Smith, he left and he went to the Jets. That's a huge part of that offensive line. This newly revamped, they've invested a decent amount of draft capital into this offensive line. They obviously signed Tyler Guyton two days ago, fears ACL tear. That's one of their starting offensive linemen. Robert Jones, as of 3 days ago, reportedly broke a bone in his neck, will miss multiple months. That's one of their starting linemen. Tyler Smith, one of their other starting offensive linemen. 2 hours ago, he had to leave camp altogether due to issues with his knee and tendonitis. No projected time return. You're talking about a running back having to go to a decimated offensive line, like not just like a new team with like a shaky, like they might be rolling out 4 backup offensive linemen at this point. And that's not to say, they can't pull something together and still perform. It's just to say injuries amongst the offensive line are more impactful usually than injuries at any other position. So do with that what you will.
Yeah, so look, let's move on and get into X factors for this team here. And so who do we think or what do we think is going to be the most important thing for this Cowboys team this year?
Yeah, there's a lot of places you could go with what you might think the X factor is on this team. We've mentioned the offensive line. We've mentioned a couple new additions on offense. There's some weirdness with Micah Parsons and his contract, and maybe he's in a Terry McLaurin situation at some point. What does that mean for the defense if they no longer have Micah Parsons? Those are all going to play into this season, and I think I found out the X factor that can kind of be the blanket over all of this is their owner slash guy who makes all their decisions, Jerry Jones, and just him not being a moron. He has made so many decisions throughout his tenure that are just head scratchers. And, some of them are going to come to fruition this year, certainly. I mean, we don't know yet if the George Pickens trade was good or bad. We haven't seen him play for the Cowboys yet, but it was certainly a notable move. If they don't sign Micah Parsons, I don't know what that means for their defense. I mean, he is the center of that whole thing over there, and I just don't trust anything Jerry Jones does running this team, and so I think the biggest one that really stands out to me is the head coaching decision. They fired Mike McCarthy, and they just hired their offensive coordinator, who was under Mike McCarthy and not even calling the plays, to be the new head coach. Like, to me, that doesn't scream new culture. That doesn't scream, let's turn this ship around. Let's light a fire under these guys and let's play some good football. To me, that screams, I didn't really want to do the whole rigmarole of interviewing head coaches. Like, I don't know. It felt like there was a lot of, every year there's new coaches throughout the league, and it just seems, we've talked about this back in one of our early episodes when all the coaches were getting hired. This is just boring at best and terrible at worst. And it all traces back to Jerry Jones. And I think if the Cowboys, this year aside, if they want to be a true contender again, if they want to be back in those Super Bowl glory days, I think it's going to take Jerry Jones no longer being involved with this franchise, because I think he's lost the touch.
Dude, 100%. His son, people don't realize this, but his son is kind of, seen as the guy who's going to take over. He's been helping out with decision making. He's the one who prioritized building that offensive line. That was not Jerry Jones who built that 2010s offensive line. That was his son. And it's like, that's probably the best we've seen the Cowboys be in years. And Jerry Jones just seems to have a perfect, like, he knows exactly when to ruin it. Like, exactly when to do something that he thinks is going to be the next big thing and just ruins it. Yeah, I absolutely believe Jerry Jones for sure would be the pick for X Factor. So many of the cards on the Cowboys table are dependent on him right now. But I'm going to cheat a little bit. But I think it's because I have to. The X Factor this year, in my opinion, is Dak Prescott. I know we said no quarterbacks, but more
I'll allow
than
it,
any
counselor. I'll allow it, but watch yourself, counselor.
Hear my case. Hear my case. More than any other quarterback in the NFL, I think he has more to prove this year in this specific season. Dak Prescott he's still at least got to be like top 5 paid in the league. He has been here, he took over from Tony Romo. He has been here for elite offensive line play. He's had elite run games. He's had elite defense. He's had elite pass catchers. He's had and name any aspect of the team. At one point in his career, he's had them be elite. And in my head, elite means top 5 unit. He's had everything. He's had a dream in terms of personnel to play with. And it has resulted in nothing. Genuinely nothing. The Cowboys routinely get bounced in the wild card and divisional rounds. And they cannot find postseason success. And in the biggest moments, Dak looks out of place. I'm not even a guy who hates Dak Prescott, but I genuinely believe this year, if they're going to be anything, this offensive line is seemingly in shambles. They no longer have an elite run game. Their defense may be in shambles. And you know what? they can't fix a ton of it because they paid him $1 trillion. Like, he is getting paid so much that they don't have the roster flexibility. So I believe this has to be it for Dak Prescott. This has to be the year he shows that he can elevate a team, right? You have CD Lamb, you've got Jake Ferguson, a solid pass catching tight end. You've got George Pickens now. Go out there and light the world on fire. 5,000 yards, 40 touchdowns. Like, go out and light the world on fire and win a playoff game. Because if not, I think this could be the nail in the coffin for Dak Prescott, legitimately.
Yeah, even with quarterbacks who are on contracts, you never know when a owner GM like Jerry Jones will be pulling the plug here. And so you're right. It's time for Dak Prescott to prove it. And it's so funny. Like, it was time for Tony Romo to prove it for so long, and they just ended up accepting what he was because he was taking contracts that were fine and justifiable. But you're right. They just before last season started, literally just before it started, they paid Dak Prescott a lot of money, and so he's going to have to play up to it this year, and certainly going into the season with everybody healthy, at least at the start of the year, the excuses are minimal for him. So,
Yeah.
we've touched on it a little bit, but the Cowboys are one of the league's biggest question marks here. The offense has the potential to be explosive in the pass game. That is, if Dak Prescott can return to form and stay healthy. George Pickens can learn to play second fiddle to CeeDee Lamb, which he will have to do. And Javonte Williams can consistently deliver on some of the flashes he showed in Denver. Those are all big ifs. And their defense has their work cut out for them, even if Micah Parsons is on the field. They need to try to bounce back from a down year last year as well. And so even if he's on the field, it's going to be a tough hill to climb for that defense, but especially if he's off the field for any portion of the regular season, it's going to be a big, big mountain for them to climb. But let's round things out here. We won't spend too much time on the New York Giants, but we do want to talk about them a little bit because they are going to be, if nothing else, the meme team of the year. We need to come up with they were called it's like Mean Joe Green. Who's going to be like Meme Joe Green for the Giants, right? Like, who's it going to be? So you'd be hard pressed to find a team that had a more disappointing season last year than the Giants. Daniel Jones ended up fizzling out. Their former star running back, Saquon Barkley, thrived with their division rival, and their season quickly went off the rails. They turned into one of the worst teams
And
in the
all
NFL.
of this shown on Hard Knocks.
Yeah, and they got it all on film, which is also hilarious. But they turned into one of the worst teams in the NFL very quickly. And so one of the only bright spots was that rookie wide receiver Malik Nabers. He lived up to the hype, and he gives them something to build around offensively. In addition, the defensive line is also stacked with good players as well over there. So that's something to build around on that side of the ball. We talked about it with Mike McDaniel, but it is certainly show up or ship out time for Brian Daboll. This offseason's key was to get enough competent players to show that Daboll still has the goods and can coach the team through this portion of the rebuild back to contention. That was the goal for the Giants, was to just get enough players who we know can play at least okay ball to show that Daboll can, he can still lift players up a little bit with his skill and keep his job, hopefully. So let's talk about that offseason and what they did and who they got and if they were competent or not. Let's go to their offseason recap.
Yeah, so guys they brought in, they got some defensive secondary help. They brought in Paulson Adebo from the Saints, solid corner. They brought in Jevon Holland, the safety from Miami, who I think is very good. And they brought in the summer's hottest couple, right? They brought in Russ and they brought in Jameis Winston. This is going to be the show. They could both be the backups this year and it'll still be the show. Like, they will be the talk of the team regardless of how this team performs. Very excited to see what that looks like. I can only imagine the content that will come from that quarterback room. But then as far as, guys that left, they got rid of Isaiah Simmons, who no one seems to be able to unlock. One of my favorite defensive players in the league, and it just seems like no one's been able to figure him out. And then Drew Lock, who goes back to Seattle, I believe, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So not a ton of losses. I like the players they brought in. So I think you're absolutely right. This is a make or break for Dable for sure.
It's a rule, I guess. Drew Lock and Russell Wilson can never be on the same team at the same time. They have to miss each other by just
They have
that
to be
much.
close.
They have to be really
Yeah.
close to being on the same team at the same time, but they have to go away from each other. They have to come 1 degree from being on the same team. It would be too powerful. They would be too powerful a quarterback room for the league to handle. But I will say this about the quarterback situation before we move on to X Factors and talk more about it a little bit. So at least to start the training camp and the offseason, it was not deemed to be a quarterback competition. Brian Daboll has said that Russell Wilson is the starting quarterback, and that's not up for debate right now. Now we'll see. Things happen in training camp and in the preseason happened to Russell Wilson when he started in the league. He ascended to that point, so anything can happen. But I will mention, just because, again, I make the rules and I talk about who I want to talk about. Russell Wilson is going to be the starter here unless something crazy happens in the preseason. So, which is notable to me. Let's talk about X Factors and start with Drew, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the stuff we've already talked about.
Yeah, so I also kind of broke Dallas's rule because I struggle with this team because there are guys to like in general. I like Malik Nabers. I think he's a good wide receiver. I love Abdul Carter, their first round draft pick, number 3 overall, I believe. So like there are reasons if you're a Giants fan to be like, things to look for this year, development. But in terms of success, I'm not really seeing it happen. So what am I interested in? And I'm interested in this crazy ass quarterback room they've got going on. And I know we've already kind of talked about it, but I want my turn.
Yeah.
And
There's one guy we haven't mentioned yet.
Right. Honestly, I think their success this year and how they feel about the future does hinge on the performance of some of these guys. So, like you mentioned, Dallas, Russell Wilson is penciled in as the starter right now. He has, I'll just give the quick recap. He's going to go to the Hall of Fame someday, but at the same time, the last few years have been bad to hilariously bad for him. He's obviously the meme guy off the field, Mr. Unlimited and all that, and the Danger Witch. And then to back him up, you got Jameis Winston, who is just the craziest interview in sports and gives you the best quotes. And, I still I'll eat dubs on my own because of Jameis Winston. Just absolutely hilarious. And then they traded back into the first round this year to pick the quarterback from Ole Miss, Jackson Dart. And his most notable trait is that he went to the Gruden quarterback camp thing and Gruden asked him to demonstrate his snap count, and all it was a clap. And he's like, no, I want to see the whole thing. And he's like, all right, that was it. He just seems totally I think he's got some natural ability and talent, but there's nothing going on up here. And he's a quarterback, and he's a first round pick. And then at the very end of the depth chart is Tommy DeVito, who looks like, the classic New York, New Jersey, Guido style Italian guy over there. So he's probably the guy a lot of fans are rooting for to get the job. But I do think that this is an X factor because, what version of Russell Wilson are they going to get? And if it's not him, what version of Jameis Winston are you going to get? Because we've seen both of them with very high highs, but we've seen the low lows with them as well. And then if it's, the season kind of gets away from him and it's later in the year, I'd love to see Jackson Dart get some reps in there. And I want to see what the Giants have in him because I really don't know what to make of him. He was a first round pick. That's obviously, there's some potential there, but he also seems like a dummy, for lack of a better term. So I'm honestly very interested to see how this all plays out, what the future beyond this year is for any of these guys. Like, how much more do we see of Russell Wilson, and how many other teams does he play for? Same with Jameis Winston. Is Jackson Dart the future here? I don't know. These are all questions I'd like to see the answer to, and that's what I'm looking for from the Giants. I'm not looking for a playoff team. Brian Dable, he's as good as fired, in my opinion. I don't see any way he does well. The team does well enough for him to keep his job after this year. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, 100%. That's the story of the Giants. As I said, it doesn't matter if this team's good, bad, or in between. The story is going to be that quarterback room. It is primed for entertainment and memes and just everything. I'm very excited to get a behind the scenes look into some of the stuff that's going to come out. But for my X factor, I went with this front seven, and specifically really the edge group. Famously, the Giants have won 2 Super Bowls recently. Well, I say recently as if my childhood isn't so long ago. But recently to me, they've won 2 Super Bowls very much on the back of just an elite defensive line. Their offenses both of those years were so-so. Their secondaries both of those years were so-so. But they had elite edge rushers, they had elite defensive line, and they were able to pressure, and they rode that all the way to Super Bowl victories. And I look at this group. They traded for Brian Burns, an elite pass rusher. They had Kayvon Thibodeau, an elite pass rusher, in my opinion. They draft Abdul Carter, prospects as a elite pass rusher. This may be the best edge room, period. Like, not even joking, this may be the best pass rushing group in the NFL. A lot, very much unproven at this point, just with how young they are. And I know people throw out Pittsburgh and Alex Highsmith and TJ Watt and stuff, but it's like this truly pound for pound may be the best edge group, and I think they could ride that far. They can ride this group, and if they are able to come out and dominate, a good defensive line and good pass rush can disrupt any team. And this team doesn't need to put up 30, 40 points if their pass rush stops every quarterback from going out and lighting them up. And I think that's what they're going to try and do, to be honest. I think we could see a lot of packages where all 3 of those guys are in rushing the passer. And they just kind of, say, hey, try us. Run the ball or try us, because our dudes are coming. And yeah, so I think that's going to be their X factor this year. Because I don't know. I look at that group and I love it. I'm excited to see those guys pass rush this year. And yeah, I think it'll be good.
I wonder if any other team has ever justified starting Russell Wilson by the fact that they have a really good defensive line that can stop people. Probably not. And certainly not recently, and certainly not the last team he played for. And certainly if that did happen, it went fine. So the Giants, they are almost certainly, I think we all agree, not going to contend for anything this season. But they brought in some players that could help stabilize both the locker room and the product on the field. Not high ceiling additions, but maybe some floor raisers. And so the defensive line looks to be a strong point, as you mentioned, and may well end the season as one of the top units in the NFL. I think I agree with that too. And so what the offense can put together will ultimately determine how, both how the Giants fare this season as a whole and how long Brian Dable is the head coach of Big Blue. So let's wrap up our conversation on the NFC East. And the last thing we're going to do, as we always do for our division previews, is we're going to predict the standings at the end of the year. So, we'll go with Drew first and then Matt. And so let's get our predictions on wax here about how this division will shake out at the end of the season.
Yeah, so I thought about going bold. I thought about different scenarios here. But ultimately, with this division, I just kind of went chalk, and I have the Eagles winning this division. I feel like the Eagles are going to be, once again, one of the best teams in the NFL. Uh, I have the Commanders finishing in second again. I don't know if they're going to be a 12-win team again, but I think this division as a whole is bad enough that they should still pretty easily get second place and maybe compete for a playoff spot. A lot of that hinges on Terry McLaurin. And then I've got the Cowboys finishing in third and kind of in a boring middle ground place where not good enough to really make a playoff push, not bad enough to have one of the best draft picks, and just kind of a middle of the run type of season for them. And then I think the Giants are going to get last because I just don't see the pathway to the Giants being very good at all. Now, obviously, a lot of things can happen, but that's just kind of how I would lay it out. That's just the same as last year.
You know, I respect that. I definitely see the logic in that. Um, I have Philly finishing first as well. I don't think there's much question there. They are not just the best team in this division. You could argue the best team in football still, based off of roster construction. Um, I have the Giants finishing second. I do. I love this front seven for the Giants, like probably more than I should. But people forget that's just their edge group. We're not even talking about the fact that they've got Dexter Lawrence up the middle too, and he's an absolute monster on the D line. And genuinely speaking, if they were to, I think this is all contingent for me on Russ not being the starter, because Jameis Winston can go out and throw for 4,000 yards and 40 touchdowns and 40 interceptions, and I think they have a winning record. Jackson Dart can go out and be remotely exciting, and I think they have a winning record. Russell Wilson, I think, capped them a lot. There's just no explosives anymore with him. A lot of his explosives on the Steelers was just playing three flags up with George Pickens, and that's not the type of receiver Malik Nabers is. If they are to bring out Jameis or Jackson, I think the Giants could make a push to finish second in this division, as crazy as that sounds. But that's just with all the turmoil happening. Finishing third, I have Washington. I do very much fear for the loss of Terry McLaurin. Without him, and if they make no adjustments for that, I don't know how this offense is going to do. Terry kind of opens up the whole playbook for them. So if he's gone or holds out, that is going to really be concerning for me. And then with Dallas, I think just with the recent news of all the offensive line, I think Dak Prescott, I've had him as the X factor. I don't think he's going to come out and show us that he's the man. Like, he's had way better teams with way more talent and not done anything. So what's to make me think on a worse team he's going to come out and put them in, playoff contention, let alone division contention. So I have them finishing fourth. Kind of a weird, not how I would have predicted this division coming into this, but just looking at everything, I think Philly, New York, Washington, then Dallas is my ranking.
All right, well, there you go. That is our going to wrap up our division preview episode about the NFC East for this year. That's how we think it's going to end, and great conversation around the teams in this division. I think, like I said at the beginning, a lot of them are really interesting, so I'm glad we're able to have a longer conversation about some of these. So that'll end not only our division preview for this division, but also our episode. Appreciate you listening and watching. If you watch here on YouTube, appreciate that. Subscribe if you haven't already, and share us around. We'd love to get some more eyeballs on this show of ours as we enter into the start of the preseason and really ramping up football talk, and then the entering into crunch time of MLB. We do baseball shows as well. If you weren't already aware, we did a live show last Thursday for the trade deadline. And so that was awesome. We'll go live every now and then. when we do it. And so how to know when we're going live too, you can follow us on Instagram. We make those announcements over there. And then we have some a little bit more fun over there as well. And so follow us there at Dingers and Stingers is the name of the Instagram handle there. It is also the name of the show. But this week was missing some Dingers and Stingers. We didn't do any, unless you guys did them on the live show, and I wasn't there. No, you
We
didn't.
did.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't think so. But so I was assuming they'd be missing. So the namesake of the show missing this week, but we'll be back at it again next week. But yeah, so appreciate all the love and support. Comment below what you guys think of the NFC East. We'd love to engage you in some discussion. But other than that, we will see you again for our MLB show next week. So stay tuned for that. And until then, take care. Goodbye now.
Bye.
Bye.